Welcome back to the show. My name is Justin with Justin This World, and this episode is going to be a fairly quick one. So rest assured, you don't have to worry about listening to me for too terribly long. And I know that that's kind of a not cool joke against myself, but it is all good. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you wherever you are at. This is going to be an episode focused on the election, which I know that most of you are probably tired of hearing about that, but it's going to be short and to the point, I promise. And before belaboring too terribly much longer, you can connect with the show, just in this world, down below. There's a link to our link tree, and you can find different methods of connecting there. And I would encourage you to do so. It'd be great. We'd love to connect with you further. And beyond that, I just want you to know that you're not alone in your anxieties towards this election. There is a lot of reasons to be concerned, for sure. There's a lot of wonder as to how it might go. There's a lot of wonder as to what might happen after the fact, during, and I'm going to talk about a few of those things today. And I'm going to talk about all those things from a Christian perspective, as I want to cover a lot in a short amount of time. Some of it's going to be pretty rapid. My hope is, like with any other episode, that this gives you tools and resources to start a conversation or continue the conversation. In that your community, your people that you do life with, these are things that you should be able to talk about with those people. You should be able to talk about openly. And I share that because you're not alone. I mentioned that before, and I want to continually go back to that in any episode. You should know that you're not alone. Not only do you have God with you, which cool, right? Most people don't take the time to accept or understand what that ultimately means. We like to pass off, well, whatever happens this election, it's just God's will. It's just it is what it is, and there's nothing I can do about this election and such. And to a fault, there's some correctness there. There's nothing that you can do ultimately other than what you've been given the responsibility to be able to do, and that is to vote and to participate. Now, I do recognize that for a lot of people, participating here and in this context is stressful, and you may not want to do it. You may not want to have these conversations that seem so politically incorrect, and so we try and avoid them because we don't want to offend anybody or cause division. And to a fault, there is some correctness there too. We don't want to cause division. However, there are several things in life where division is necessary. We don't want to cause division among our brothers and sisters. But at the end of the day, is there or should there be some conversations that we don't just shove under the rug and pretend like, we don't really want to have this conversation because it just might cause division? Well, there's a sign of something else there. We should be unified under the gospel. We should be unified under God's word. We should be unified under the truth. We shouldn't be looking for unification in divisive issues by not talking about the divisive issues. We should address them. Now, what does that mean for us in this election? Well, that means that tomorrow, by the end of the day, we should have announced several seats in our political offices, from your local elections to your statewide elections to the national elections. And there's going to be a lot of turning stomachs. There's going to be a lot of fear. There's going to be a lot of stress that's going to come because of this. And again, rightly so. There's a lot that seems to be at stake with this election, more, at least in my lifetime, than I have seen and experienced or recollect. Granted, there have been some pretty arduous elections. There have been some pretty stressful times in our history as a nation, or really recently, even. And by recently, I mean within the last 100 years. If you go back to 1924, things weren't exactly all smooth sailing for us as people back in 1924. Coming off of World War One, we it was things were moving. The industrial revolution was really beginning to kind of ramp up in some cases. We have a lot to look back on history and be grateful for the lessons learned and the experiences had. But it wasn't too long after that 1930 approached, and within a couple of years, we were in the worst economic depression that we've seen as a nation in our recorded history. But then we could go back even further to when this nation was being developed in the first place, and look at all the freedoms that were assaulted, and the very reasons that we separated from the great empire that was, and built what many look at as the new empire, the American people, this nation that is so great, and could, dare I say, be great again with some actual leadership and some actual focus on the American values that built this nation in the first place. But when people get what they have been asking for, which is more depravity, more, I mean, just deviating from where we started, deviating from the values that hold this nation dear, well, you get more and more division. You get more and more people wanting to be the god of their own lives, and that is not a anomaly in history. Look back across history for since the beginning of time, and you'll see that we've always wanted to be our own god of our own life. We've always wanted to be our own authority, and that is where slavery truly exists, is in the authority that is provided by the world, or alluded to by the world, that you could have, or look at all of the things that you could have. Did God really tell you not to touch that fruit? Really? Why? It's just because he wants to keep it for himself? No, maybe it's because there's something to be cautioned there. And then history continues to play out, and we as people continue to do the same thing. And historically, 300 years or so is the average timeline of an empire. What does that mean? Well, that means that we're getting dangerously close to no longer existing if the data stays the same. Granted, the age of information and technology is much, much, much more advanced than it was, and yet people seem to solve problems of their own a lot more often. Oh, because we have so many things. We have so many things to be grateful for, so many blessings, so many just so many pieces of tech, and just the houses we live in, and all sorts of things that we're just like, wow, like this is great. All these advancements are just so great, and they just make my life so, what's the word? Easy. So easy, in fact, that we have, in many cases, abdicated our responsibilities to the ease. And that makes things more difficult over time. We become less and less insulated from the government. We become less and less insulated from other people's decisions. We become less and less insulated from economic downturns. We become less and less insulated from the world around us. And in fact, we start to grow in anxiety because we know that the slightest the slightest decision, one direction or another, could impact my bottom line as a person, the household, as a family, very quickly. We've seen in the last few years, we've seen an increase in cost of living like none other. Some have seen it more aggressively than others. And this causes anxiety, this causes stress, this causes worry. This causes us to turn from God as our source of refuge, and to turn to our bank accounts, and to turn to our stockpiles, and to turn to the things that we probably haven't been giving enough attention to begin with from a responsibility perspective. And then we start to lose sight of the one who does hold it all. And then that's where worry and anxiety increase. Yes, there is much to be concerned about. Just call it what it is. We are facing an election that could easily dictate a rather chaotic few years coming up. There are a lot of Christians that have claimed to not want to participate in voting for one reason or another, and that's not cool. You have a responsibility to be involved to an extent. At the very least, you can vote. You can cast your vote and participate to that level. You can do that privately. You don't have to have any conversation surrounding who you're voting for and such. And then there's the reality that there's plenty of opportunity to engage in the public square around these conversations. And I will attest to, and I've shared in a couple of podcasts recently, and there's a lot of opportunity to talk about Jesus in these conversations. There's a lot of opportunity to talk about truth and to talk about life appropriately in these conversations, absolutely. But you've got to be willing to step into the discomfort. If you are experiencing heightened levels of anxiety and worry and fear about the election, then you may need to do a bit of a self check. You may need to take a moment, take stock of the last several years of your life, and ask yourself how responsible you've been. How responsible have you been with your savings, with your finances? How responsible have you been with information? Have you been paying attention at all? Are you surprised that we are where we are, or are you just worried and just blown away at how we got here? And I won't keep clawing away at that onion and peeling back the layers, but the truth of the matter is, we live in a very fast-paced society going absolutely nowhere. We are going from one app to the next, from one dose of entertainment to the next. We are continually, rapidly, rapidly getting distracted. And we don't spend enough time in any one area to actually grow, learn, or become an expert in anything. And so we know a lot of useless information that does us no good. Yes, it's a general statement across society as a whole. Yes. And some of you might be an anomaly in that case. Or perhaps you have at some point taken the responsibility and taken the initiative to make different decisions and not expect that the same decisions that you made are going to get you magically different results. Well, you might have needed to change several years ago. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. So what does that mean? Well, for you personally, listening to this, that might mean that okay, the rubber has finally met the road. You need to make some different decisions. You need to start thinking a little bit different. You need to take more responsibility for where you're at in life, for the life that you live, and the decisions that you made. You need to accept responsibility for those things, where you're at, and make a plan to move forward. You need to take stock of where your rest truly lies. Are you seeking after his kingdom first, or is it your kingdom? Are you hiding behind this idea of like I'm here for his kingdom, and yet doing absolutely nothing to participate in the very life around you, the very blessings that God has given you? If you live in the US of A, the United States of America, you have got to take a step back and think about the rest of the world. Why is it that so many people want to come here? Have you thought about that? In these world conflicts, there's a lot going on right now. Does it wrap up your attention to think about all those things? Do you actually think about them, or do you just see headlines and just assume that the world's in chaos because of the media and the headlines that you have? Do you actually know facts? Do you talk about any of these things with people that can offer perspective? Not just opinion. We all have the opinionated friends who seem to know an awful lot about nothing as well and are happy to share it. And then we think about those few people that actually seem studied in certain areas. Perhaps we should spend a bit more time having productive conversations rather than just throwing a bunch of mud at the wall and hoping that some of it sticks eventually. What is it that really gets you going? What is it that really gets you agitated? That really gets you upset? It gets you fired up? It totally distracts you from the truth and from what might be right in front of you. What is it that you just can't seem to have a productive conversation about because you get so emotionally charged, you get so fired up that nothing starts to ultimately make sense, and it's all about just being right the whole time rather than presenting the information, rather than finding that common ground and having a dialogue and a conversation, rather than asking questions. It is amazing what asking questions of somebody who seems to have a really defined stance on something will reveal. And not necessarily in an antagonistic way, but just finding out, well, how have you come to that conclusion? What has your life, what has your journey been like? By what process of information have you landed upon that conclusion? Let's talk about that, because that's where you're gonna find some glorious conversation. And sometimes it's gonna be more fun than others. Sometimes it's gonna be more exciting than others. So going forward, why am I sharing all this stuff about conversations and talking and being involved with that? Well, because I mean, it could get a little bumpy in the next couple of months. It could be bumpy for the next few years. It could be bumpy for the next decade. What are what are you going to do about that? What are you going to do in your life? Because we will spend a whole lot of time being concerned about what's happening in the White House, and rightly so. I mean, there is you can say all you want to that the federal government doesn't have that much impact on your life, but it does. Yes, the state government ideally has more power over your life. In that we're not beholden to a central power, but I mean we've given up a whole lot of power over the last few decades to our federal government, and it is what it is at this point. What are you going to do about it? Is the question. And no, I'm not calling for breaking away from the government as it is. I'm not talking. That's a different episode for a different time. What I'm calling for is what are you going to do in your life, in your government, in your household? What's going to be different? Are you going to take lessons from the world that you've seen in the last few years and do something about it? Or are you going to continue to think a whole lot and do absolutely nothing? Are you going to continue to find yourself in conversations that just make you feel tired and weary and afraid and concerned and worried? Or are you going to be a productive member of those conversations? And let's start talking about some solutions. Let's start talking about what we can do within our own households to perhaps adjust the flow of cash through our house, whether or not you have it flowing or not. Perhaps it is being a bit smarter about those finances. Perhaps it is just prioritizing the one relationship that can give you the strongest foundation of anything in or out of this world, and that would be God. Your relationship with the truth, your relationship with the Father. Maybe we start prioritizing that. Maybe we start prioritizing getting into his word. Maybe we start prioritizing the relationships that God has blessed us with that are right in front of us instead of our relationship with our devices, with entertainment, with numbing ourselves. Society has been numb for far too long, and people are starting to wake up. People are starting to feel the pain. People are starting to feel the people are starting to feel the discomfort. And a lot of people don't have the refuge that you do. A lot of people don't have the peace that you do. Do people ask you why you're so at peace with life and what's happening? Do people ask you why you seem so steady and even, unfazed by the things in this world that are happening, and so focused on something else? Do people ask you what's different about you? Maybe it's because there's not enough different about you. Maybe it's because there isn't anything different about you. These are just questions. Questions to ask yourself, questions to consider, questions to ponder as you go into today. When this goes live, it'll be election day in the United States of America. And there's going to be a lot of cheering from one side of the aisle and a lot of disdain from the other. Okay, that's going to happen. Everybody has their desired outcome that they're looking for. Excellent. If you get that outcome, are you going to learn from this experience at all and continue to realize that change, as much as we want it to be from the White House, it really needs to start in your house too? In fact, you have the most access, the most responsibility within your house. So let's focus on what we can do to be part of the solution too, and not expect that the White House is gonna be your savior because it ain't. It's not your savior, and it never will be. It's never going to solve all of your problems. And in this world, in this life, you're always going to have some problems. It's not perfect. We shouldn't expect it to be. But just because it's not perfect and we shouldn't expect it to be, doesn't mean that we sit on the sidelines and we watch it burn. It doesn't mean that we sit on the sidelines and watch our freedoms and our responsibilities erode in front of us without without getting involved to protect those things. What about for future generations? What do you want them to say about you? What do you want your kids to say about you? Oh yeah, we kind of saw it all unraveling, kind of saw it all happening. Oh, Grandpa, well, what did you, what, what happened? What'd you do about it? Oh, I just kind of sat and watched. I just watched it all happen. I mean, what am I gonna do? Well, there's a perspective to be proud of. There's a legacy to leave. We have a responsibility as Christians to be more active in the world around us, not in it, not of it rather, but in it. We are in it, and it's not an easy thing. It's not easy to be in this world and not of it. It's not easy to avoid becoming like the world around you. It just isn't. It is a constant. It's a constant struggle. How's that for a little stuttering for you? It's a constant battle. Why? Because everybody else, it just looks so nice to just kind of stick your head in the sand and pretend like evil doesn't exist. It's so nice to assume that there's no spiritual warfare happening and it's just life and these things just happen. It's so nice just to ex- accept the fact that you are to accept the reality that is proposed to you by Satan, that you don't matter, that your input doesn't matter, that there isn't a God that just desires you to be with him, just desires you to live your life and in glory of him as his creation, as his own. And yet we will hear the truth. We will read the truth and we will hide it away and do nothing with it. We will go to our workplaces and we won't stand out. We'll do whatever we can just to blend in. We don't want to rock the boat. We don't want to be that guy or that gal. And then we'll wonder why we're dealing with things that we're dealing with. Like feeling like the whole world's falling apart around us. Sure, not any one of us is going to solve all of those things, but you'd you'd like to think that a a band of brothers, oh, a band of brothers can bring change, can bring difference. Men rising up to their calling as men can make a difference. Men rising up to be men that God has called them to be. Mm, mm. What would that look like? What does that look like in your life, in your community? What does it look like to step up to the challenge? And these are questions I ask myself too. These are questions that have guided and informed much of who I surround myself with and who I spend time with and who I engage in conversation with. These are all thoughts that I have had personally. I'm not sharing anything in this episode that is meant to be an indictment on you and not on myself. I am sitting right there. And there have been far too many times where I've sat on the sidelines, knowing knowing that it just takes a little bit of courage to step onto the field, and yet choosing to remain seated. In 2025, much can change. Regardless of who you want to be in office, though, it's not going to magically get easier when said individual takes office in January. It's not. It's not just gonna, all of your problems are not just gonna go away. And they're not gonna stay away if they do. Welcome to the world around you. It's time that we accept the reality check that we've been given. We accept it as the gift, as the warning, as the caution that it has been, and we do something about it. This world needs Christians to share, to speak, and to live the truth. For it's the truth that will set you free. And those that have found their life in Christ, it is those that are free indeed. And that's a freedom that is worth fighting for, that is worth sharing, and that we need to rise to.